Hello everyone. Switching back from my latest videos where I've been doing a lot of professional and personal advice type videos, I thought I'd come back to something maybe a little bit more interesting to people wanting to learn IT, and that's to come back to Angular 2. Now, if anyone saw my previous video, I was basically going through Angular CLI and how to get that up and going on your machine. That was probably about 2-3 weeks back now, so I can't remember how long ago that was. So some things have changed since then. So if you didn't go through my video at that point, I'll just quickly show you now how to set that up. So if you've got a terminal bash open on your Mac machine or any kind of Linux terminal, if you're using Windows, you'll need to install Node Package Manager. But if you haven't got the CLI yet, you can just go npm i-g angular-cli, and what that'll do is that'll now go and update the latest version of the Angular CLI for you. I'm just running it even though I've got the latest already, just to show you that that's how it's done. So it's just stepping through now, checking, see if I've got the latest. Doesn't take long. Should take about a minute or so, maybe less. You ignore those warnings at the moment. It doesn't seem to affect how Angular CLI runs, but you can see it's pulled down a couple of things that has changed since the last time I ran this command. But basically that's it. So now at this point you'll have Angular CLI installed in your system. So now that we've got that going, what I want to do is go through Angular modules, which I feel is an important subject in Angular 2 and something that probably gets overlooked when you first try to learn it. And the reason why I want to cover this first is because it's how you basically organize your code in order to provide features for your application and swap them in and out with the easiest of fashions. So where I'm going to get started is I'm going to actually create a project now. The project I'm going to call it is basically basketball stats, just because I'm a bit of a basketball fan. But now you've got the Angular CLI installed on your terminal. Go to the directory where you feel comfortable installing your new application. So at the moment, I'm in my Angular 2 folder. There's nothing in there. I have no folders or anything like that. So in order to now get a new application ready and up and going using Angular CLI, you just go ng new and then the name of your application, which I'm just going to call basketball stats. Then enter. And then that goes away and starts to create all the files necessary, as well as install all the node packages that are required for this to work. So yes, we are using TypeScript for setting up our Angular 2 applications, and as a result of that, there's a lot of node related packages that get loaded into the project directory, and that's what it's doing right now. This could take a few minutes, depending on how quick your internet connection is. You know, I'm from Australia, so our connection is not as good as lots of other countries that I've been in. You know, the US is very fast, the UK is pretty fast too. Most countries are faster than Australia, so this should be much faster for you when you do this. Now I've got everything installed, so that's great. So now if I do an ls, you'll see I have a folder called basketball stats. If I cd into that now, and ls that, we've got a whole bunch of files. We've got our node modules, we've got the package.json, which you expect with any node application. A few files there to just do with end-to-end testing and just overall testing. A README file, that kind of thing. But the folder we're going to be looking at in this particular lesson is the source folder, the src folder. So let's cd into that. And if we take a look at this, again, we've got a few folders. We've got an assets folder, we've got an environments folder for setting up different deployment environments. The main.ts is the main file, or basically the entry point for the application. We'll explain more about that in a minute when we start looking at what's and basically makes up a module and how that's loaded. You got a CSS file there, you got some polyfills, so on and so forth, right? So all this stuff is basically kind of like a backbone of an application, like a skeleton. Now, the main folder, again, that we'll be looking into is the app folder. So here you've got, in the early stages, you've got a component for a Angular 2 application, and you've got what's referred to as a module. So that's what this we're going to be covering off here, is what our modules and what their purposes are, so on and so forth. So let's just quickly get this application running so that we can see that it's working. So to do that, we just go ng serve and go enter. So all this was covered in a previous tutorial that I did, but in order to get people who may not have seen that back up to speed, I'm just doing this. So you can see now in the green at the top, you've got ng live development server is running on localhost port 4200. So now if I come in over here and I go localhost 4200, you should see that it says AppWorks. Right? If you've seen that, it means your Angular 2 application is running and ready to go. So now that we're at this point, let's go and actually have a look at the code, and more especially, let's have a look at the module aspect. So first, what I'm going to do so that we don't have Kit running is I'm going to go Control C here to quit. So what that does is it basically turns off the development server and all that stuff that checks for changes in the code. I'm just going to turn that off for the moment. Anyway, so now I'm going to step into Visual Studio Code, which I have open in a new window, and I'm going to open up that folder that I just created. You can see it's already here. I'm going to open it from the source directory because I don't really care at this stage what any of this stuff is. It does have a purpose, but for this lesson we don't really need to know that. So let's go open. And so we've got our source folder here, we've got the app folder, the assets, environments, favorite icon, the index. So this is the root page where we start. So when the Angular application starts, it comes here and basically reads this file first, as well as we'll start to look at this main TS, which is compiled into a JavaScript file. But this main TS is basically our entry point into our Angular 2 application. Polyfill TS, that's more to do with just making sure ECMAScript 6 works in our application, so we can do some more fandangle, basically write better code essentially, to support the latest version of JavaScript that's going to come out soon. CSS, again, nothing in here at the moment, but it's essentially like your main style sheet. Test to do testing. tsconfig.json, that's the configuration file for TypeScript to configure, how TypeScript's going to compile to what type of JavaScript. You can see out of the box it's going to support ECMAScript 6 and DOM. Again, I'm not going to go too far out of that. The target overall is ECMAScript 5. Typings, again, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that either. So usually when an application starts, or when the compiler for basically what we refer to here as Webpack, which is what the Angular CLI is using behind the scenes, it'll first look in this main.ts file and go, okay, where's my entry point to the application, right? And so we've got this thing called a platform browser dynamic class, and what that is essentially it's saying what kind of runtime are we going to be running our Angular 2 code in. And the reason why it asks that is because Angular 2 can also run in a server environment, it can run in all different kinds of environments. This one happens to be in the browser. So because we're running an application in the browser, we're saying we want a browser dynamic environment, or that's the kind of environment we're going to be running in. So we're importing that and we're setting that up and we're bootstrapping that particular application to something called an app module. So what is this app module? And you look at it and you go, okay, is this like the starting point of an application? Well, yes and no. In this situation, the app module happens to be the starting point. So where is this located? Well, it appears to be inside of an app folder, right? But it's not specifying what the file name is. So by default, when we're importing an app module from the app folder, it comes into the app folder here, and it looks for index.ts, right? Looks at index.ts and goes, okay, what have we got here? We got a component that we're exporting, and we've got, there's this module. It's called app.module, right? It goes, okay. So, is the app module a class inside of this file, or is it inside the component file? Well, it happens to be inside of this app.module.ts file. And there it is right there, right? That's the name of the file that's being exported. Now, basically, just to give you some background, what a module actually is it's basically a class that builds up a set of metadata that describes the functionality that's part of a particular component or piece of functionality. In this specific circumstance, what it is, it's actually the entry point for the main application, and it describes what components and what features are part of the main application. So in this case, we have this thing called an app component that we're importing into here. We're declaring that as part of the module, right? So this is saying that when we load this module, we're also going to be loading in this app component, right? And we're also importing some external libraries that are external to this external modules, that are external to this module, called the browser module, the forms module, and the HTTP module. And they all come from Angular itself. So this is part of the Angular framework. And basically, just to give you a quick understanding of what they are, browser module is for reading the templates or some of the template data inside of your browser. So things like ngIf, ng4, that kind of thing. If you don't have the browser module, you can't read those directives. So you need this in order to understand certain directives in your templates. Forms module is more for the ng model, which again is the way to set up two-way binding in Angular 2. It's similar to Angular 1, though the syntax is a little bit different. But again, if you don't include forms module, you won't be able to do anything with forms. Or at least you won't be able to handle any binding in forms. And the HTTP module, which is a module that basically makes what it does, HTTP calls to different environments. So it could be that you're making a REST call to an API or something like that. In order to do that, you need this HTTP module. So technically, you don't actually need, and in fact, I'm going to take this out just to prove the point, you don't need this module for the skeleton application because we're not making any HTTP requests. So let's go and check to make sure the application still works. So I'm going to come back in here, I'm going to go ng-serve, just to give you an idea of what is actually necessary. So at the end of the day, this browser module has its own set of features that it brings to the table, as well as this forms module. And the import statement is saying, when we export this module, we're also going to take the functionality of it, plus the functionality that's inside the browser module and the forms module, as part of this whole component, right? And I can use anything inside of all three of these in an external library that's calling this. This happens to be the root module, so there is no module that depends on this. But as you will see in the next video, I will be creating my own module, and you will see that the app module will actually depend and import that module in. But for this first example, I'm just going to say that this app module is external. This is the actual application, and that it requires a browser module and a forms module in order to operate. In fact, even forms module is not needed for this first example, but you can see as I come back over, the application still works. So it still says app works, right? So if I take away, actually no, I'll leave that for another time. But basically, that's the makeup mostly of what there is. So at this point, we're just including the one component. So if we have a look at the component, it's pretty straightforward. It's app.component.ts. It's a type of component. The selector for the component is the app root element. Now, I don't know if I told you this when I look back at index, you'll see an app root element here. So basically, when we bootstrap this module, right, inside the main.ts file, when we call this line here, and it begins to bootstrap the application, it's going to replace this line here, or the data that's inside this app root here, with the component, with the HTML that's inside this template URL of the component, which happens to be an app.component.html, which is why you get a title, right, in a header, and that title attribute comes back from the component, which happens to be, in this case, at work. So if you wanted to change what it says, you could put I am awesome here, right? And we can save that. And now that I've changed that, it'll start to rebuild. And now it says over here, I am awesome. Right, so cool thing about the whole CLI is that while it's running, any change I make will be instantly reflected over in the browser, which is pretty darn cool. It can be a bit of a nuisance at times where you're modifying multiple files and you're not done yet, and it breaks the application. But never mind, you can kind of overlook that. Anyway, back to this. So this is the one component that we're actually including as part of this module. If we want to include another component, say for example we want to have a Teams list component, we can include that as well. So what I might do as part of this example is I might create a route for Teams, or even players. I might do both actually. I'll do Teams and players just to give you an idea of how routes are also kept within a module. I don't want to get too involved, but I just want to basically break these up and show you what they all mean. So I'm going to add 2 more sections under app here, one for Teams and one for players. So let's go do that. So I'm going to come back over to the console. I'm going to stop the CLI from running, and I'm just going to find out quickly where I am. Cool, I'm in here. I'm going to make a new directory. I'm going to call it players, and I'll make another one called Teams. So if I now go ls on that, we'll see you've got a new players and Teams folder. Now, I don't know if anyone's looked at all the commands for Angular CLI, but there's a whole list of commands that you can use straight out of the box. So if you want to generate new components and new modules and directives, pipes, services, whatever. For this example, I'm just going to be creating a new component. So I'm going to create a team list component under the Teams folder. So first we go ngg, so that's ng generate. G is short for generate. We're going to generate a component, and I'm going to call it, I'm going to put it in the Teams folder, and I'm going to call it team list, like that. Don't have to specify .component because it will do it itself. So if I now go return, you'll see there that it's created 4 files. So for each component, if you haven't already known this, there's a code file, which is a TypeScript file. There's what's referred to as a spec file, which is a test file. Then you've got your HTML, and then my apologies. You've got a component.css, and I'm going to talk more about these in probably a future video, but basically in order to demonstrate what I'm going to do now is if I go back to the code, you'll see that instantly, because I used Angular CLI to construct the component, the module has already automatically imported it into the file, and it's also added it as a declaration. So as I said, in order for this to work, you have to include the team list component as part of the declaration for the model. So we're going down, or let's go into app component, and I'm actually going to include the team list. I'm assuming it'll be called team list like this. I'll just quickly check if I go into teams, team list component, app team list. Yeah, so this selector represents the actual name of the markup. So again, I'll explain that more when I get to components. If I now go and save this and I run, no. Right, ngserve. I'm going to come back over here. You'll see a message under here. Once it's finished building, it'll come under here and there'll be something saying load teams or something like that when it refreshes. Load it up. Yeah, there it is. Team list works. So I've just included a new piece of functionality into my application by including into my module the team list component. Now if I remove this, right, and I'm no longer saying this is part of the module, right, and I save, what's going to happen is it's going to load, or it might not load actually, and the reason for that, if I show up the console, is that inside of the template that I created, I added that new app team list, right? And because I removed the actual component from the module, it's no longer, the code no longer knows anything about it, right? When it's been bootstrapped. So it's like, oh, I can see you've got a element here. It's called app team list, but I don't actually have a component that exists that matches that element, right? So it's like, oh, crash, right? So the application completely crashes, which makes sense, right? So if I go and add this back in, then obviously there's a component that now understands that selector. So when we come back into this, and once again it understands it. So that's kind of how we inject or specify what pieces of functionality are included in a particular module. Now, in small applications, you will keep all of these particular components in one module if it's a very, very small application. Obviously, though, if you're talking about 1,000 components, you do not want this to be 1,000 lines long. So what happens? What do we do in that situation? Well, we create more modules. I'm not going to do that in this lesson. I'm going to cover that in the next lesson, because there's a few concepts that I want to talk about in regards to doing that. But just for completeness, we'll go on to the players list. We'll make sure that it goes through the same routine here, and that the players list is also going to get loaded. And then I'll show you quickly how it works with routes. So going back across, again, I'm going to cancel with Control-C, if I haven't already told you that's how you cancel that. We're going to come back to here. All right, so we're currently in the main app directory. We're now going to go ng g component players / player list. Well, player list. Same as before, same idea. Create a new component. We go back over. We see it's already included. We'll come up to app.component. Probably this time we'll know it to be app player list instead of just app team list. And I think the reason why they have app in front of it is it's meant to be the name of your app. So I think this should really say basketball stats -team -list. I think that's part of the coding standards that are in Angular, is that the name of your app should be what is prefixed at the start of all these elements. But I'll just run this at the moment and see if that works. Keep in mind, again, that component has been loaded into the main module. So it should say under here, it should say team-list works, and under there it should say player-list works. And again, once again, it's not refreshing. I'm not sure why. So I will refresh it. And there you go, player-list works. So now we've added 2 components to the module, and well, technically we've got 3 now. We've got the main app component, which is this view here. Then we've got like child components. One is the team list, one is the player list, right? So just say, for example, though, we're not happy with the way this is set up. So we don't want to show the team list all the time, and we don't want to show the player list. We only want to show one or the other when we're clicking on a different area of the site, right? So just say we go /teams, at the moment, it just always goes to the same place, right? There's nothing that stops that screen from loading, regardless of what URL we've got. So how do we get around this? Well, there's something called routes. And anyone that's done Angular 1 has worked with routes before. So I'll quickly go through how to do that and how that works. This is probably not really related too much to how modules work, but for a future lesson, it's easier just to get it in now, so I can describe, or I can talk more about modules in regards to routes later. But in this one, we're just going to keep everything in the one main module. So let's go over, and we're going to come back to our module. And inside the imports, we need a new module, right? And what it's referred to is that it's called the router module. So we go router module, and it's from an Angular library called angular-router. Right? And then down in our imports, well, yep, you got router module. However, because we're going to include the routes directly in here, what we do is we call a method off the router module, and it's called for_route. Sorry about that. For_route takes in an array, and inside that array we can have a number of different routes. And I've got the comma here. I was just wondering why it was red. So the first route we might want. Is teams. So inside of this first entry, sorry, I'm trying to get this right here. Trying to get the alignments right. Path is what we call it. We're going to call it teams, right? Because when we go /teams, we want to go this particular route. And then what you do is you actually specify the component that you want to use to handle that route. So in this case, we want the team list component. Right, so that's the first one. Then we'll come in and we're going to do one for players. So we go path is players, and the component is obviously the player list component. Right, and then we want a global catch or an empty link catch. So when we hit the root of the site, we'll go path is blank. So when we first load the site, we're going to make it go to, in this case, we're going to show the playlist again. We want to show the playlist no matter where, or if we come straight to the site straight away, or we go /players, it's going to be the same response. And then finally, if we use any route that's not either of those three, which we specify with 2 stars like that, we're going to go to a new component, which I haven't created yet, which is the not found component. Right? Cool. So I'm going to go back out here. I'm going to stop the angular-cli again. Oops. I'm going to go and create a new component at this level. So yeah, ng g component not found, just like that. So I'll go ahead and create the not found component. So if I come back over, you'll see that I honestly thought that would have worked. Not sure why that didn't import the component. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. It's created a not found feature. That's not what I wanted. Let me go back over and address this. I didn't want it in a folder. So technically I want this stuff out here. Sometimes the CLI is too fancy and trying to put all these things into feature folders, which kind of picks me up, catches me off guard a little bit sometimes. So now I want to delete that folder. I don't want that folder. And remove the trash. Right, so now I've got it in the main folder. On here I'm just going to put in, this is the component, this is the CSS for the component. I don't want that. So, because I made a mistake, I now have to manually import this not found component. Still not sure why I didn't add it anyway, but I'm going to say not found dot component. So now the not found component is there. We'll just quickly go to HTML. Yeah, not found works will do. So just save this file. Oh, it did actually add it. It's just that it didn't update in real time. Ah, bugger. Okay. I'm just going to get out of this. Just pulling the one for the disk. How do I do that from this? I'll click that. I think that fixed it. Just a slight merge issue there, guys, because I thought, you know, that it should have loaded it directly straight in. It didn't, so I overwrote the file. Anyway, I think everything's good now. Not found component, app.component. component. What I'm going to do now is I take these away, because what you're going to see in a minute is that I don't need them. Right, whoops. So before I was just loading them as child components. Now they're going to be a component of their own. The other thing I need to do is I need to include something called a router outlet, like that. And this is basically the location of where the routes, or the result of the route, the components HTML will go. It'll actually go into this location. Okay. I'm not gonna show how to do links to different routes or anything like that in this video, but in order for the routes to work, I need a router outlet in a particular location. So I'm going to stick it straight under the main component. So you'll always have that title that's part of the app main component. So I'll always say I am awesome, and then directly under that it'll have what's contained inside of each component. Alright. So now let's give this a try. It should work, I think. I'm fairly confident. ng-serve. So just let it build its modules. So all it's doing is basically taking all the TS files and converting all the JS. So you can see here main.bundle, styles.bundle, and inline.bundle. It looks like I've got a break here. So what have I done? Not found component is not part of the ng module. I thought I included that. For whatever reason, I forgot to add it here. See, these are some of the mistakes you make when you have everything in the one module. I included it as a part of the route, but I didn't include it as part of the declarations. So now save that. So now if I run it again, it should hopefully work. So you can see by default we're at the root of the site, and remember I said that the player list component needs to be loaded by default. You can see there it has. So if I now go /teams, you'll see that team list is loaded. If I go /players, you'll see that the player list is once again loaded. If I go to something like cat, you'll see it's not found. Alright, so everything's working as intended. And that's pretty much it. So if you look at, well, at least for this first lesson, that's it in terms of making a very simple application that has one module in it. The module contains whatever components and other pieces of information it needs. It's got its imports for its modules, so anything other modules it depends on. You've got the route specified inside of the module. This provides the I didn't mention, but basically it's Angular services that you might depend on for this module. You'll chuck in the providers attribute, and this bootstrap probably here is only ever really needed once. And this is to specify that this module is going to be the bootstrapper, and the component that we want to start off at so this is kind of like the entry level component is the app component. So if I made this, for example, the teams list component, right? This is actually interesting. I haven't tried this, but we'll see what happens. I'm pretty sure it'll probably bust because it doesn't have a Rada component, a Rada outlet in it, and it has busted. And it'll probably say because it doesn't have app team list did not match any elements. Yeah, because so I'm going to undo this. Because inside of the main index, we are not looking for that. If I go now, I'm not going to muck around too much, but basically, I would have to make the app team list be shown here instead of app root. So that's it with that. So in the next video, I'm going to cover breaking some of this stuff out, because if you can think about it, if we were to have a much bigger application and we had 150 routes or something, and we had 160, 170 different features in the application, including shared libraries and all this other stuff, this file would just be way too big. This one module would be way too big. So what I'm going to address in the next video is the ability to have multiple modules to break up each feature, and how do we handle loading each of those modules into the main application module here, and what are the implications of loading it directly versus loading it indirectly, which is basically lazy loading it. We'll cover all that in the next few videos, but in the next video we'll probably just look at breaking this up into multiple modules and just instantly loading them into this main app module. So thank you everyone for listening, and I'll see you next time.